I still remember the exact moment when everything shattered. It was at Scarlett's wedding, surrounded by crystal chandeliers and champagne towers that cost more than my annual salary. The kind of opulence that screamed, "Look at us, look at how perfect we are." I stood at the edge of the reception hall in my thrift store dress, holding Leo's small hand as he gazed wide-eyed at the elaborate decorations. He was only 4 then, still innocent enough to believe that Grandma's house was a safe place, that family meant love. Patty spotted us immediately. Her eyes, cold and calculating as always, swept over my simple cotton dress and Leo's clean but worn outfit with the kind of disgust you'd reserve for finding a cockroach in your soup. She didn't even bother to lower her voice when she turned to one of her society friends and said, "Oh, that's Eleanor, my husband's little mistake from college. And that child, well, some accidents just keep on giving, don't they?" The woman laughed, a tinkling sound that felt like glass shards in my ears. Leo's hand tightened in mine. He didn't understand the words, but children always understand tone. Scarlett glided past us in her $10,000 gown, the diamond on her finger catching the light like a small sundae. She paused just long enough to lean in close, her perfume overwhelming and cloying. "Try not to embarrass us today, Eleanor. I know it's difficult for you, being so perpetually unsuccessful and all, but could you at least pretend you belong here?" Her smile was saccharine sweet, the kind that never reached her eyes. She touched her ring deliberately, making sure I saw it, making sure I remembered that she got everything while I got nothing. "After all, we're carrying quite enough burden already, having to support you and that boy." Support us. The words were laughable. We lived in a cramped room behind their mansion, the kind of space you'd use for storage, not people. The walls were thin enough that I could hear every cruel comment, every mocking laugh. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, scraping together enough to feed Leo and keep him in clothes that fit. The only support they provided was a roof over our heads, and even that came with a price. Patty made sure I paid for it in humiliation and unpaid labor, treating me like a live-in servant who happened to share DNA with her husband. Leo tugged at my sleeve, pulling me toward the dessert table. He'd been so good all day, sitting quietly during the ceremony, not complaining when other children ran and played while I made him stay close. He deserved a treat. We made our way to the elaborate spread of pastries and cakes, and Leo's face lit up when he saw the chocolate eclairs. He reached for one carefully, using both hands like I'd taught him, but the table was just a bit too high for him. What happened next unfolded in slow motion, the way traumatic moments always do. Scarlett swept past, her gown billowing behind her like a sail. She bumped into Leo, hard enough that it couldn't have been an accident, and he stumbled. The glass of punch he'd been holding, the one he'd been so careful with, went flying. It arced through the air in a perfect curve and splashed across Scarlett's pristine white dress, leaving a bright red stain that spread like blood across the silk. The room went silent. Every conversation stopped. Every eye turned to us. Scarlett's scream could have shattered windows. "You little brat! You stupid, clumsy little brat!" She advanced on Leo, who had frozen in place, his eyes wide with terror. Before I could move, before I could throw myself between them, Patty was there. My stepmother, the woman who'd made my entire childhood a living hell, the woman who'd never once shown me an ounce of kindness, raised her hand and brought it down across Leo's face with a crack that echoed through the hall. Leo fell. My baby, my gentle, careful boy, fell to the ground like a rag doll. The cupcake he'd managed to grab slipped from his fingers and hit the marble floor with a sad little splat. For a moment, everything stopped. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. Patty stood over him, her face twisted with rage. "You piece of trash! You're just as stupid and worthless as your mother. All you do is ruin everything around you." Her voice carried across the silent room, each word a hammer blow. Scarlett laughed, actually laughed, a sound so cruel it made my stomach turn. "That's right, Mother. Trash deserves exactly what it gets." I heard Miss June, our elderly neighbor who'd been invited out of courtesy, gasp. "Patty, what have you done?" But her voice seemed far away, muffled. Like I was underwater. I was staring at Leo, at the bright red handprint on his small cheek, at the tears streaming down his face, at the way he looked up at me with those enormous eyes that asked why did Grandma hurt me? Why doesn't she love me? Something inside me broke. Not broke like cracking, but broke like a dam bursting, like chains snapping, like a cage door flying open. I'd spent 26 years accepting that this was my life. That I deserved this treatment because I was born from an affair, because my very existence was an inconvenience, because I'd compounded that sin by having Leo outside of marriage. I'd convinced myself that if I just worked harder, stayed quieter, made myself smaller, eventually, they'd see my worth. Eventually, they'd love me. But they'd hit my son. They'd struck a 4-year-old child at a wedding in front of 100 people and felt no shame. And in that moment, with Leo's sob cutting through my heart like a knife, I realized they never would. Love wasn't something you could earn from people who were fundamentally incapable of giving it. I walked to Leo. My legs felt strange, like they belonged to someone else, someone stronger. I knelt down and gathered him into my arms. He buried his face in my shoulder, his small body shaking. I stood up, and for the first time in my life, I looked Patty Vance directly in the eye without flinching. "All right, Mother," I said, and my voice was steady, calm, cold as winter steel. "You wanted a war. You're going to get one." I turned and walked out of that reception hall with Leo in my arms, leaving behind a room full of shocked guests and the shattered illusion of the perfect Vance family. Behind me, I heard Patty spluttering, heard Richard calling my name, heard Scarlett's indignant shriek. I didn't look back. For the first time in my life, I didn't look back. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in our cramped room with Leo curled up beside me, his cheeks still swollen, his breathing punctuated by occasional hiccups. He'd cried himself into exhaustion. I'd held him, and rocked him, and sung to him, until his sobs quieted, all while rage built in my chest like a living thing. Around midnight, he woke up briefly and looked at me with those trusting eyes. "Mama," he whispered, his voice small and broken. "Does Grandma hate me?" The question drove a spike through my heart. I pulled him closer, breathing in the scent of his hair, feeling the fragile warmth of his body against mine. "No, baby. Grandma is sick in a way that has nothing to do with you. You are perfect. You are loved. And Mama is going to make sure no one ever hurts you again." He fell back asleep, but I stayed awake. I pulled out every piece of paper I'd saved over the years, every scrap of evidence I'd kept without really knowing why. My old diaries from childhood, filled with accounts of Patty's cruelty, the times she'd locked me in the basement for crying, the times she'd made me skip meals as punishment for existing, the times she'd told me I was worthless, stupid, a burden, a mistake. I'd written it all down, a chronicle of abuse in careful childish handwriting. I found Leo's birth certificate, the one that listed Richard Vance as his father. They'd tried to get me to leave it blank, tried to convince me that claiming Richard would make everything harder. But I'd insisted, and they'd relented, probably thinking it didn't matter since they'd never acknowledge him anyway. I found medical records too. The time Leo had pneumonia and Patty refused to let me take him to the hospital because it's just a cold, stop being dramatic. The bruises that appeared after visits with Scarlett, the ones she claimed came from him being clumsy. The burn on his arm from when Patty had accidentally grabbed him with a hand that had just been holding a hot pan. I documented everything. Not intentionally, not as part of some master plan, but because some part of me had known. Some buried survival instinct had been collecting evidence, waiting for the day I'd be strong enough to use it. The next morning, I called in sick to both my jobs. I left Leo with Miss June, who'd shown up at dawn with a bag of groceries and tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, honey," she said, hugging me tight. "I should have said something sooner, should have done something. But I'm here now, whatever you need." She pressed something into my hand. A USB drive. I recorded what happened yesterday, the whole thing. I always record weddings for my scrapbooks, but this you need to have. I stared at the small device in my palm. Evidence. Real, undeniable evidence. "Thank you," I whispered. Miss June squeezed my hand. "There's more, Eleanor. Things about that family. Dark things. I've lived next door for 30 years, and I've seen things. I've kept quiet because, well, who was going to believe an old woman over Richard Vance? But if you're finally standing up to them, I'll tell you everything I know." I spent that day at the public library, using their computers to research. I looked up family law, child protective services, domestic violence statutes. I read about emotional abuse, about the long-term effects of childhood trauma, about legal precedents for removing children from harmful environments. The more I read, the more I realized that what I'd endured, what Leo was enduring, had names: gaslighting, scapegoating, physical abuse, emotional neglect. We weren't crazy. We weren't oversensitive. We were victims of systematic cruelty, and there were laws designed to protect us. Around 3 p.m, I walked into a small coffee shop called The Daily Grind. I'd been there a few times before, always ordering the cheapest thing on the menu and making it last while I filled out job applications. The owner, a woman named Sarah with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair, recognized me immediately. "Eleanor, honey, what can I get you?" she asked, then stopped. "Oh, sweetheart, what's wrong?" I hadn't realized I was crying. The tears just came, spilling down my cheeks in silent streams. Sarah came around the counter, guided me to a booth in the back, and sat down across from me. "Talk to me," she said simply. So I did. I told her everything. About growing up as the unwanted child of an affair. About Patty's cruelty and Richard's indifference. About having Leo and watching him become another target for their hatred. About the wedding, about the slap, about the moment I'd finally broken free from the cage of their expectations. Sarah listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each revelation. When I finished, She was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and took my hands in hers. Eleanor, I'm going to introduce you to someone. His name is Daniel Hayes. He's a lawyer, specializes in family law and domestic abuse cases. He's also my nephew, and he's one of the good ones. Will you talk to him? I hesitated. Lawyers cost money I didn't have. Sarah seemed to read my mind. Just talk to him. Let him hear your story. Daniel doesn't do this for the money. He does it because he believes in justice. Will you at least meet with him? What did I have to lose? I nodded. Daniel Hayes arrived at the coffee shop an hour later. He was younger than I expected, maybe in his early 30s, with dark hair and serious eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He shook my hand firmly, ordered us both coffee, and sat down with a legal pad and pen. Miss Vance, he said. Or do you prefer Eleanor? Ellie, I said quietly. I prefer Ellie. Ellie, then. My aunt says you need help. Tell me everything, from the beginning. Don't leave anything out, even if you think it's not important. So I told the story again. This time, though, I had my documentation. I showed him the diaries, the medical records, the birth certificate. I pulled up the video Miss June had given me on his laptop. We watched in silence as Patty's hand connected with Leo's face, as my baby fell, as those words echoed through the reception hall. Trash deserves it. Daniel's jaw tightened as he watched. When the video ended, he sat back and looked at me. Ellie, this isn't just a case of a difficult family. This is systematic abuse, and it's been going on for years. What they did to Leo, that's assault. It's child abuse. The emotional trauma they've inflicted on both of you, that's actionable. He paused. But I need to know something. What do you want out of this? What's your goal? I thought about Leo's question from the night before. Does Grandma hate me? I thought about 26 years of being told I was worthless. I thought about every bruise, every insult, every moment of being treated like I was less than human. And I thought about the future, about the kind of life I wanted for my son. I want them to never hurt us again, I said. I want Leo to be safe. I want to be free of them. And I want them to face consequences for what they've done. Real consequences, not just me walking away and them continuing their perfect lives like nothing happened. Daniel nodded slowly. That's going to require a multi-pronged approach. We'll need to file for legal separation from Richard, establish your independence. We'll pursue full custody of Leo with a restraining order preventing the Vance family from having contact. And we'll file criminal charges for the assault on Leo, backed by civil suits for the years of abuse you've both endured. He looked at me seriously. This won't be easy. They'll fight back. They have money and influence. But you have the truth, and you have evidence. Are you ready for this? Was I ready? I thought about Leo's swollen cheek, about the fear in his eyes, about spending the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next blow, the next insult, the next way they'd find to remind me I was nothing. Yes, I said. I'm ready. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Daniel moved fast, filing paperwork, gathering statements, building our case. Miss June provided her video and a written testimony about everything she'd witnessed over the years. The woman had kept a journal, it turned out, documenting every scream she'd heard through the walls, every time she'd seen me with bruises, every incident she'd observed but felt powerless to stop. Other neighbors came forward too. Once word got out that someone was finally standing up to the Vances. Mr. Chen from 3 houses down talked about the night he'd seen Richard drag me into the house by my hair when I was 16, home past curfew. Mrs. Rodriguez mentioned the time she'd offered me food because I looked so thin, so hungry. Even the mailman had a story about Patty berating me on the front lawn for 20 minutes because a package had been delivered to the wrong address. The pattern was clear, undeniable. Years of abuse, witnessed by dozens of people, all documented and ready to present in court. Meanwhile, I cut off all contact with the Vance family. I didn't answer their calls or texts. At first, they were angry. Patty left voicemails demanding I return home immediately, that I stop this ridiculous tantrum, that I remember who provided for me. Scarlett sent text messages calling me ungrateful, pathetic, a bad mother for keeping Leo away from his family. Richard tried a different approach, speaking in calm, reasonable tones about how we needed to talk this through like adults, how I was overreacting. I saved every message. Daniel added them to our growing pile of evidence. When the Vances realized I wasn't coming back, the messages changed. They became threatening. Patty said she'd make sure I never got another job in this town. Scarlett promised to tell everyone what a terrible person I was. Richard, in a rare moment of direct cruelty, texted that I was just like my mother, weak and useless, and Leo would grow up to be just as pathetic. I saved those messages too. Sarah gave me a job at the Daily Grind, full-time with benefits. It didn't pay much, but it was enough. More importantly, it was honest work in a place where people treated me with respect. I learned to make lattes and cappuccinos, memorized orders, chatted with regular customers. For the first time in my life, I felt like a person instead of a burden. Leo started seeing a therapist, a gentle woman named Dr. Martinez who specialized in childhood trauma. Slowly, carefully, he began to talk about his feelings. About being scared of grandma, about not understanding why she was so mean, about the nightmares he'd been having. Dr. Martinez told me that Leo was resilient, that children could heal from almost anything if they felt safe and loved. She gave me exercises to do with him, ways to rebuild his sense of security. Every night, I held my son and told him he was wanted. He was loved. He was perfect exactly as he was. And slowly, I watched the light come back into his eyes. 2 months after Scarlett's wedding, we got word that the Vances were planning a major event, a business dinner, Daniel's investigator discovered, with potential investors and community leaders. Richard was trying to secure funding for a new development project, something that would cement the Vance legacy and bring them even more wealth and prestige. They'd sent out elegant invitations, planned an elaborate menu, pulled out all the stops to present themselves as the epitome of success and respectability. Daniel looked at me across his desk. "This is our opportunity," he said. "They're going to have everyone who matters in that room. The people who keep their social status afloat, who provide their business connections, who maintain their image. If we're going to make an impact, this is the moment." "What did you have in mind?" I asked. He smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who'd seen too many abusers get away with their crimes, who'd watched too many victims suffer in silence. "We're going to serve them the truth, and we're going to make sure everyone sees it." The night of the dinner, I dressed carefully, not in my usual thrift store clothes, but in a simple black dress that Sarah had helped me pick out. I looked professional, composed, nothing like the scared girl who'd fled that wedding reception. Daniel wore a suit, Miss. June came too, dressed in her Sunday best, her camera tucked in her purse. We had a plan, and it was audacious enough to either work perfectly or blow up in our faces. We arrived at the Vance mansion as the guests were being seated. Through my connections with the catering company, Daniel had arranged for us to be part of the dessert service. The caterers were in on it, horrified by what they'd heard about the Vances and more than willing to help bring them down. Money talks, but moral outrage talks louder. I pushed a cart loaded with elegant boxes through the dining room. Each box contained a beautifully decorated cupcake, the kind of artisanal dessert you'd expect at a high-class event. But tucked inside each box was something else: a card, a photograph, a small audio player. The truth, packaged and ready to serve. Patty saw me first. Her face went white, then red, then purple with rage. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, standing up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Get out of my house right now." "This isn't your house, Patty," I said calmly. "It's Richard's house, and I'm here in an official capacity." I gestured to the cart. "Dessert is served." I handed the first box to Patty. She grabbed it like she wanted to throw it at me, but the weight of a dozen eyes on her made her hesitate. The guests, I realized, were watching with the kind of fascinated horror usually reserved for car accidents. "What is this?" Patty demanded. "Open it and see," I suggested. She ripped open the box. Inside was a perfect chocolate cupcake with cream cheese frosting. Nestled beside it was a card. Patty picked it up, and I watched her face as she read the words printed there. "Enjoy your dessert, Patty. This one's called Truth." Before she could process what that meant, a small speaker hidden in the box activated. My voice filled the room, young and scared, reading from my diary. February 14th, 1999. "Patty locked me in the basement again today because I asked if I could have a Valentine. She said I don't deserve love. She said I'm a reminder of Dad's biggest mistake. She said if she could make me disappear, she would. I'm so cold down here. I'm so hungry. I'm only 9 years old. Why does she hate me so much?" The room went silent. Patty stared at the box in her hands like it had turned into a snake. This is, she stammered. But she had no words. What could she say? It was my voice. My words. My truth. Scarlett grabbed her box next, ripping it open aggressively. Her card read, "For the sister who always got everything." Her speaker played a different recording, this one from just a month ago. Scarlett's voice, crystal clear and dripping with contempt. "God, Mother, do we really have to let them stay? Eleanor is such a drag, and that kid is basically a liability. Can't we just, pay her to go away, put them up in some cheap apartment across town?" Scarlett's face drained of color. Her fiancé, sitting beside her, stared at her with an expression of dawning horror. Around the table, guests began pulling out their own boxes, opening them with trembling hands. Richard found a photograph in his. It was of Leo, age 3, with a bruise on his arm shaped distinctly like adult fingers. The card read, "This is what happens when a grandfather would rather ignore his grandson than admit he exists." Another guest opened a box containing a printout of text messages. Patty to Scarlett. If Eleanor thinks she's getting any inheritance, she's delusional. Everything goes to you. She's not really family anyway. Scarlett's reply. Good. She and that brat deserve nothing. More boxes were opened, more truth spilled out. Medical records showing Leo's untreated ear infections, his delayed vaccinations because Patty refused to help with transportation to the doctor. Photographs of me at 15, visibly underweight, hollow-eyed. Testimony from teachers who'd reported concerns about my home life, concerns that Richard had used his influence to sweep under the rug. The accumulated evidence of 26 years of abuse, laid out like a buffet for a room full of witnesses. I pulled out a small portable speaker from the cart, larger than the ones in the boxes. I connected it to my phone and pressed play. Miss June's video from the wedding filled the room, projected onto the wall behind me via a small projector Daniel had set up. The guests watched in silence as Patty struck Leo, as Scarlett laughed, as my 4-year-old son fell to the ground like trash. When the video ended, the silence was deafening. I looked around the room at the shocked faces, at the investors and community leaders and society friends who thought they were coming to a pleasant business dinner. This is the real Vance family, I said clearly. Not the charitable pillars of the community they pretend to be. These are people who abuse children, who torment and manipulate for sport, who've spent decades hiding their cruelty behind money and social standing. Patty lunged at me. Actually lunged, hands outstretched like claws, a sound coming from her throat that was barely human. Daniel stepped between us smoothly, catching her wrists. I wouldn't do that, Mrs. Vance, he said calmly. Assaulting someone in front of this many witnesses would be inadvisable. Who the hell are you? Richard demanded, finally finding his voice. Daniel Hayes, attorney at law. Daniel replied, I represent Eleanor and Leo Vance in their suits against your family. We're filing for full custody of Leo, a restraining order against all 3 of you. Criminal charges for child abuse, and civil suits for emotional damages, assault, and years of systematic cruelty. He pulled a folder from his briefcase and set it on the table. You'll be served officially tomorrow, but I thought you might want a preview tonight, in front of your friends. The investors were already standing, making excuses, heading for the exits. The community leaders followed, their expressions varying from disgusted to embarrassed to angry. Within minutes, the room had cleared except for the Vance family, Daniel, Miss June, and me. Richard tried one last time. Eleanor, please, let's discuss this reasonably. You're upset, I understand, but surely we can work something out. Family should stay together. I laughed. Actually laughed. A sound that felt foreign coming from my throat. Family? Richard, you've never treated me like family. None of you have. I was a dirty secret, an inconvenience, a burden to be tolerated at best. And when I had Leo, when I gave you a grandson, you treated him even worse than you treated me. I shook my head. But you know what? I'm grateful. Because if you'd been even slightly kind, if you'd shown us even a fraction of real love, I might have stayed. I might have let Leo grow up thinking that was normal, that being treated like garbage was acceptable. So thank you, for being exactly who you are. You've made this decision very easy. I turned to Daniel. Let's go. We walked out of that house, leaving behind the ruins of the Vance family reputation. Behind us, I could hear Scarlett sobbing, Patty screaming, Richard trying desperately to call back the guests who were already spreading the word about what they'd witnessed. The story hit social media that night. By morning, it was in the local news. Miss June's video went viral, viewed millions of times. The comments section filled with outrage, with people sharing their own stories of abuse, with demands for justice. Child Protective Services launched an investigation. The police opened a criminal case. Richard's business partners started quietly distancing themselves. The Vance empire began to crumble. The trial, when it came, was almost anticlimactic. The evidence was overwhelming. Witness after witness testified about what they'd seen, what they'd heard, what they'd known, and failed to stop. Dr. Martinez explained the psychological impact of years of emotional abuse. The prosecutor presented the video, the photographs, the documented history of cruelty. The defense tried to paint me as vindictive, as an angry daughter seeking revenge. But you can't argue with evidence. You can't explain away a video of a grown woman striking a child. You can't justify 26 years of documented abuse. The judge ruled in our favor on every count. Full custody of Leo with a permanent restraining order, a substantial financial settlement for emotional damages, and the years I'd spent essentially enslaved in their home. Criminal charges against Patty for assault, resulting in probation and mandatory anger management classes. And perhaps most satisfying, a public record of everything they'd done, preserved forever in court documents and news archives. The Vances had built their empire on appearance, on reputation, on the carefully maintained illusion of perfection. I'd destroyed that illusion completely. Richard's business collapsed within 6 months. No one wanted to work with a man who'd enabled child abuse. Scarlett's engagement ended, her social circle evaporated, her influencer career crashed when sponsors pulled out. Patty became a pariah, ostracized by the very society she'd spent her life trying to impress. They had to sell the mansion. I heard about it from Miss June, who called me with glee in her voice. "They're moving to a small apartment across town," she said. "The kind of place you and Leo used to live in. Isn't that poetic?" It was. But by then, I'd moved past caring about their downfall. I was too busy building my life up. With the settlement money, I bought a small house in a quiet neighborhood 2 towns over. It had a yard for Leo, a garden where I could grow vegetables, enough space for both of us to breathe. I painted Leo's room his favorite color, blue like the sky. I hung up pictures of us smiling, laughing, being happy. I filled the house with light and warmth and everything the Vance mansion had lacked despite its size. Sarah promoted me to manager at the Daily Grind and helped me enroll in business classes at the community college. I discovered I had a head for numbers, for management, for creating the kind of workplace where people felt valued. I started thinking about maybe, someday, opening my own place. Leo thrived. Away from the constant criticism and fear, his personality blossomed. He made friends at his new school, he joined the soccer team, he laughed freely, played without looking over his shoulder, spoke without that hesitant, fearful tone that had broken my heart. Dr. Martinez said he was doing remarkably well, that the trauma would always be a part of his history but didn't have to define his future. And Daniel became more than my lawyer. He became a friend first, someone I could trust, someone who saw the strong woman I was becoming instead of the broken girl I'd been. He was patient as I learned to trust again, as I worked through the fear that anyone who got close would eventually hurt me. He showed up consistently, kept his promises, treated both Leo and me with respect and kindness. When he asked me out to dinner 6 months after the trial ended, I said yes. When he met Leo at the park and played catch with him until the sun set, making my son laugh so hard he got hiccups, I felt something in my chest crack open. We took things slowly. I'd learned the hard way that rushing led to mistakes, and I had Leo to think about. But gradually, carefully, I let Daniel into our lives. He never tried to replace Leo's father, never overstepped, just showed up and proved through actions that he was safe, that he was steady, that he wasn't going anywhere. On Leo's 6th birthday, we threw a party in our backyard. Real friends came, kids from his school and their parents, Miss June and Sarah, Daniel and his family. We played games and ate cake and watched Leo blow out his candles with pure joy on his face. As I looked around at the people who'd chosen to be part of our lives, who showed up for us without obligation or resentment, I felt something I'd never quite experienced before. Peace, contentment, the bone-deep knowledge that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. That evening, after the guests had left and Leo was helping Daniel clean up paper plates, Miss June pulled me aside. "I saw Patty at the grocery store yesterday," she said quietly. "She tried to talk to me. Asked about you and Leo. Wanted to know if you were happy." "What did you tell her?" I asked. Miss June smiled. "I told her the truth, that you're thriving, that Leo is a different child, confident and joyful, that you've built a beautiful life without them." She paused. "She cried, Eleanor, right there in the produce section. I think she finally understands what she lost." I thought about that for a moment, tried to find some satisfaction in Patty's tears, some sense of vindication, but all I felt was tired. "Good," I said finally. "I hope she cries every day, not because I want her to suffer, but because maybe, finally, she understands that actions have consequences, that you can't spend decades hurting people and expect them to keep coming back." "Do you think you'll ever forgive them?" Miss June asked. I watched Leo and Daniel through the kitchen window, laughing together as they washed dishes. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Forgiveness is complicated, but I've realized I don't need to forgive them to move on. I don't need their apology or their understanding or their acknowledgement that they were wrong. I just need them to stay away from us, to let us live our lives in peace, and if they can't do that willingly, the restraining order will make sure they do it anyway." 3 months later, I saw them. I was at the mall with Leo, shopping for new school clothes. He'd grown so much, shot up like a weed, all long limbs and bright eyes. We were laughing about something, I can't even remember what, when I spotted them across the food court. Richard looked old. Not just older, but diminished somehow, like he'd shrunk inside his skin. Scarlett was with them, her designer clothes replaced with plain jeans and a t-shirt, her highlighted hair fading to mousy brown roots. And Patty looked like she'd aged a decade. Her face was lined with bitterness, her shoulders hunched, her eyes hollow. They saw me at the same moment I saw them. Patty's eyes widened. She took a half step forward, her mouth opening like she wanted to say something. Richard put a hand on her arm, stopping her. The restraining order, I realized. They couldn't approach us, couldn't speak to us, could only watch from a distance as we lived the life they'd tried so hard to destroy. Leo noticed them too. He tensed beside me, his hand tightening on mine. I knelt down to his level, blocking his view of them. "Hey buddy, you know what? I think we've got everything we need here. How about we grab some ice cream and head home? Daniel's coming over for dinner tonight, remember? Leo's face brightened immediately. Can we make those cupcakes again? The ones with the sprinkles? Absolutely, I said, standing up and taking his hand. We'll make the best cupcakes in the world. As we walked toward the exit, I glanced back one time. Just once. Patty was still standing there, frozen, watching us leave. There was something in her expression I'd never seen before. Regret, maybe. Or just the dawning realization of everything she'd thrown away. All the years she could have had a daughter and grandson who loved her, all squandered in the name of cruelty and pride. I didn't feel triumph looking at her. I didn't feel anger or satisfaction or even pity. I felt nothing. She was a stranger now, someone from a life I'd left behind, as irrelevant to my present as a character from a book I'd finished reading years ago. Leo pulled on my hand, chattering about the cupcakes we'd make, the new game Daniel had promised to teach him, the science project he was excited about. I let the sight of the Vance family fade behind us, focusing instead on my son's voice, his excitement, his joy. That was my revenge, I realized. Not their downfall, though that had been necessary. Not their suffering, though they'd earned it. My revenge was this: living well, being happy, raising a son who would never know what it felt like to believe he was unwanted. That night, our kitchen was chaos in the best possible way. Leo stood on a step stool, carefully measuring flour while getting it absolutely everywhere. Daniel was in charge of the mixer, making ridiculous sound effects that had Leo giggling uncontrollably. I supervised, directing traffic, stealing kisses from Daniel when Leo wasn't looking, tickling my son until he squealed. We made chocolate cupcakes with vanilla frosting, topped with rainbow sprinkles that Leo applied with more enthusiasm than precision. They were messy and imperfect and absolutely beautiful. When they came out of the oven, filling the house with the smell of chocolate and sugar and home, Leo insisted on decorating them immediately even though they were still too hot. "Patience, buddy," Daniel said, ruffling Leo's hair. "Good things are worth waiting for." "Like these cupcakes?" Leo asked. "Like these cupcakes," Daniel agreed, then met my eyes over Leo's head. "And like family." After dinner, after the cupcakes had cooled and been decorated and eaten, after Leo had been bathed and read to and tucked into bed, I stood in his doorway watching him sleep. He looked so peaceful, so secure, one arm wrapped around the stuffed dog Daniel had given him, a slight smile on his face even in sleep. This was what I'd fought for. This moment, this peace, this security. The knowledge that my son would grow up knowing he was loved unconditionally, that he mattered, that his worth wasn't dependent on being perfect or quiet or invisible. Daniel came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. "You okay?" he asked softly. "I saw them today," I said. "At the mall. Patty, Richard, and Scarlett." I felt him tense slightly. "Did they try to approach you?" "No. They stayed away. But Patty looked like she wanted to say something." I leaned back against his chest, drawing comfort from his solid presence. I thought I'd feel something seeing them brought so low. Satisfaction maybe, or vindication. But I didn't feel anything at all. They're just strangers now. People from a past life that has nothing to do with who I am today. Daniel was quiet for a moment, then pressed a kiss to my temple. "That's growth, Ellie. That's healing. It means they don't have power over you anymore. They can't make you angry or sad or afraid. They're just people, and not particularly important ones at that. I used to think I needed them to apologize," I continued, "that I needed them to acknowledge what they'd done, to admit they were wrong, to beg for forgiveness. But I don't need that anymore. Their opinion of me, their understanding of their own actions, none of it matters. I know what happened. Leo knows he's safe now. That's enough." "More than enough," Daniel agreed. "You've built something incredible here, Ellie. A real home, a real family, a real life. That's not just revenge. That's victory." We stood there for a while longer, watching Leo sleep, listening to the quiet sounds of our house settling in for the night. Eventually, we moved downstairs, cleaned up the last of the cupcake mess, sat together on the couch with cups of tea. Daniel had his arm around me, and I had my feet tucked under me, and everything felt exactly right. "I've been thinking," Daniel said after a while, "about the future, about what comes next." I looked up at him. "Yeah?" He smiled, a little nervous, a little hopeful. "I love you, Ellie. I love Leo. I love coming here and making cupcakes and playing catch and helping with homework. I love being part of your lives, and I was wondering if maybe, someday, not right now if you're not ready, but someday, you might want to make this permanent. Official." My breath caught. "Daniel." "I'm not asking for an answer now," he said quickly. "I just wanted you to know that I'm in this. For the long haul, however long it takes, whatever you need, I'm here. You and Leo are my family, and when you're ready, If you're ever ready, I'd like to make that official. But there's no pressure. We can take all the time you need. I thought about the girl I'd been a year ago, scared and beaten down, convinced she deserved the cruelty she received. I thought about the woman I'd become, strong enough to stand up for myself, brave enough to demand better, capable enough to build a life worth living. I thought about Leo, and the example I wanted to set for him about what love should look like, what healthy relationships felt like, what it meant to choose happiness. Ask me again in 6 months, I said softly, not because I don't know the answer, but because I want to be sure. I want to be certain that I'm choosing you for the right reasons, not because I'm scared of being alone or because you saved me. You deserve someone who chooses you because she wants you, not because she needs you. Does that make sense? Daniel's smile could have lit up the whole house. Perfect sense. 6 months. I'll mark my calendar. Those 6 months passed in a blur of ordinary, beautiful moments, morning routines and after-school snacks and weekend adventures. Leo's first piano recital, where he played Twinkle Twinkle Little Star with such concentration his tongue stuck out slightly. My graduation from community college with a degree in business management, walking across the stage while Leo and Daniel cheered embarrassingly loud. Daniel teaching Leo to ride a bike without training wheels, running alongside him until Leo pedaled away on his own, triumphant and free. Sarah announced she wanted to retire and offered to sell me the daily grind. With my settlement money carefully invested and a small business loan, I said yes. My own coffee shop, my own business, my own dream, built from the ashes of everything I'd survived. We renamed it Sunrise Cafe, painted the walls warm yellow, installed new equipment, created a menu that included Leo's favorite hot chocolate and Daniel's preferred espresso blend. On opening day, Miss June was our first customer, and she cried happy tears as she sipped her coffee and looked around at what I'd built. 6 months to the day after Daniel's first proposal, we were closing up the cafe together. Leo was at a sleepover for the first time, something he'd been nervous about but ultimately excited to try. It was just Daniel and me, wiping down tables and putting chairs up, the familiar end-of-day routine we'd fallen into. Daniel was unusually quiet. I kept catching him watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Finally, as I was counting the register, he came up behind me and turned me around gently. "It's been 6 months," he said. My heart started pounding. It has. I promised I'd ask again. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "Eleanor Vance, you are the strongest, bravest, most incredible woman I've ever met. You've turned your life around, built something beautiful from nothing, raised an amazing son, and somehow found room in your heart to trust again after everything you've been through. I love you. I love Leo. I love the life we're building together. Will you marry me?" He opened the box. Inside was a simple ring, elegant and understated, nothing like Scarlett's gaudy diamond. It was perfect. I looked at this man who'd stood by me through the worst time of my life and helped me build the best, who'd never asked me to be anything other than who I was, who loved my son like he was his own, who showed up every single day with patience and kindness and unwavering support. "Yes," I said. "Yes, absolutely yes." He slipped the ring onto my finger, and it fit perfectly. We kissed there in my cafe, surrounded by the smell of coffee and possibility, and I felt complete in a way I'd never imagined possible. When we told Leo the next day, he was thrilled. "Does this mean Daniel gets to be my dad?" he asked, his eyes huge and hopeful. Daniel knelt down to Leo's level. "If that's okay with you, buddy, I'd be honored to be your dad, but only if you want that." Leo threw his arms around Daniel's neck. "I want that. I want that so much." Watching them hug, seeing my son finally have the father figure he deserved, I felt the last piece of my heart that the Vances had broken click back into place. We got married 6 months later in the garden behind our house. It was small and simple and perfect. Miss June was there, and Sarah, and friends from the cafe, and Daniel's family who'd welcomed Leo and me with open arms. Leo was our ring bearer, taking his job incredibly seriously, walking down the makeshift aisle with the rings on a pillow like he was carrying the crown jewels. My wedding dress was simple, bought off the rack, nothing like Scarlett's $10,000 gown. But when Daniel saw me in it, he looked at me like I was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, and I felt beautiful. Not because of the dress or the makeup or the flowers, but because I was marrying someone who loved me for exactly who I was, scars and strength and all. During the ceremony, when it came time for the vows, Daniel held my hands and spoke from the heart. "Ellie, you've taught me that love isn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It's about showing up every day and choosing each other, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. You've shown me what real courage looks like, what real strength means. I promise to stand beside you, to support you, to love you and Leo with everything I have, for all the days of my life." When it was my turn, I looked at this man who'd helped me reclaim my life, and then at Leo sitting in the front row with Miss June, grinning so wide his face might split. "Daniel, a year ago I didn't believe I deserved to be happy. I didn't believe someone could love me without conditions or expectations. You've proven me wrong every single day. You've shown Leo what a good man looks like, what real love means. You've helped us build a family based on respect and kindness and joy. I promise to love you fiercely, to choose you every day, to build a life with you that honors all the pain it took to get here. We kissed to the sound of our small gathering cheering, and then Leo ran up and hugged both of our legs, and we stood there as a family, complete and whole and happy. A year after our wedding, I got a letter. It came to the cafe, forwarded from an old address, and I almost threw it away when I saw the return label. Patty Vance. I held it for a long time, debating whether to open it or just toss it in the trash. Finally, curiosity won out. I opened it carefully, Daniel standing beside me for support. The letter was handwritten, shaky, clearly written by someone who was struggling to find the right words. Patty wrote that she was in therapy now, working through her own childhood trauma, beginning to understand the cycle of abuse she'd perpetuated. She wrote that she was sorry, so deeply sorry, for everything she'd done. That she understood if I never forgave her, that she didn't expect reconciliation, but she wanted me to know that she recognized now what she'd destroyed. That she lay awake at night, thinking about all the moments she'd missed, all the love she'd rejected, all the damage she'd caused. She ended by saying that she'd seen photos of Leo on social media, that he looked happy and healthy and loved, and that she was grateful I'd been strong enough to save him from the environment she'd created. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope. "What are you going to do?" Daniel asked. "Nothing," I said. "I'm not going to respond. I'm not going to reach out. I'm glad she's in therapy. I'm glad she's finally confronting what she did. But her healing journey isn't my responsibility. I spent 26 years trying to earn her love, trying to be enough for her. I'm not going to spend any more time or energy on her, even in forgiveness." "You don't think you'll ever forgive her?" Daniel asked, not judging, just curious. I thought about it. Maybe someday. Maybe when I'm old and none of it matters anymore. But that forgiveness will be for me, not for her. It won't come with reconciliation or a relationship. It'll just be me letting go of the last little bit of anger I'm still carrying. But I'm not there yet, and I might never be, and that's okay. Daniel kissed my forehead. "Whatever you need, however long it takes, I'm here." I tucked the letter into a drawer and went back to work. Life continued. The cafe thrived. Leo excelled in school, joined the debate team, made me laugh every single day. Daniel's law practice grew, and he took on more and more cases, helping people escape abusive situations, using the skills he'd honed helping me. We took family vacations, built traditions, celebrated holidays with joy instead of dread. We adopted a golden retriever that Leo named Sunshine. We planted a vegetable garden and grew tomatoes and zucchini and way too much basil. We lived our lives fully, openly, without fear or shame or the weight of other people's expectations. On Leo's 10th birthday, we threw a party at the cafe. Half his class came, and the place was full of laughter and chaos, and children hopped up on sugar. As I watched Leo blow out his candles, surrounded by friends who loved him, wearing a ridiculous party hat and grinning like he'd won the lottery, I felt Daniel's arm around my waist. "You did that," he whispered in my ear. "That happy, confident, kind kid. That's because of you." "Because of us," I corrected. "We did that together." That night, after the guests had left and Leo was in bed, I stood in my kitchen baking cupcakes. Not because I had to, not because anyone was forcing me, but because I wanted to. Because baking had become something I loved instead of something tied to trauma. I made chocolate ones with vanilla frosting, topped them with rainbow sprinkles, just like Leo and I used to make before everything changed. But these cupcakes were different. These were made in a kitchen full of light and love, made by hands that weren't trembling with fear but steady with confidence. Made for a family that chose each other, that built something real and lasting and good. I took a bite of one of the cupcakes, still warm from the oven, and it was perfect. Sweet and rich and exactly right. Not revenge, I thought, but something better. Victory, healing, peace. The sweetest thing of all was simply this. I was happy. Genuinely, deeply, completely happy. I'd taken the worst things that ever happened to me and transformed them into strength. I'd taken abuse and turned it into advocacy, helping Daniel with his cases, speaking at local schools about recognizing family dysfunction. I'd taken shame and turned it into pride, building a business and a family and a life that was entirely mine. Sometimes I still thought about the Vances, wondered if Patty had continued therapy, if Scarlett had found a way forward, if Richard ever acknowledged his failures as a father. But mostly, I didn't think about them at all. They'd become background noise, a chapter in my story that had already been written and closed. My story now was about Leo's laughter, about Daniel's steady presence, about the cafe full of regular customers who knew my name and asked about my day. It was about Miss June teaching Leo to knit, about Saturday morning pancakes, about the tiny mundane joys that added up to a life worth living. On the 5-year anniversary of Scarlett's wedding, the day everything had changed, I woke up in my sun-filled bedroom next to my husband, listened to my son singing off-key in the shower, and smiled. 5 years ago, I'd been broken and scared, and convinced I deserved the pain I was in. Today, I was whole and strong and certain of my worth. I went downstairs and started making cupcakes. Leo came down still damp from his shower and immediately started helping, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Daniel appeared with coffee for me and hot chocolate for Leo, kissing both of us good morning. We worked together in comfortable silence, broken by occasional conversation and laughter, making something sweet and simple and good. When the cupcakes were done, we sat at the kitchen table and ate them together. The three of us, a family. The morning sun streamed through the windows, catching the dust motes in the air, making everything glow golden. This was revenge, I thought, not destruction or punishment or getting even. This moment, this peace, this life built from the ashes of everything they'd tried to take from me. I'd won. Not because they'd lost, though they had, but because I'd found something they'd never had and never would. Real love, real family, real joy, and that was the sweetest victory of all.